Ryan O'Quinn stars in Paul's Promise, which is now in theaters. The film is based on a true story. Ryan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here. Appreciate
Ba-
it.
Based on a true story set in the civil rights era, tell me a little bit about what we're going to see in this film.
Well, it's an incredible. I'm a little biased, Rudy, but it's an incredible true story of a man named Paul Holderfield, who was, by his own admission, a racist, a bigot, somewhat of a ne'er do well. He grew up very poor. He was the son of a sharecropper. His childhood best friend was black, and when he got into their middle school years, middle school and high school years, Paul unfortunately sort of shunned his best friend and literally turned his back on him, literally and figuratively turned his back on him, pretended like he didn't know the man. And it wasn't until later in life that Paul really had a change of heart on at risk of ruining the story for your for your viewers, for your audience. He promised his mother on what was essentially her deathbed that he would take a look at this faith thing. She had prayed for him his entire life and really just encouraged him to take a look at her faith, at Christianity, and to dive into it and to look closer at it. And when he did, it made all the difference. So he did a complete 180 in his life, realized, among other things, that racism, discrimination, all the isms is not biblical, and he apologized for that and ended up starting a ministry and a food pantry and a shelter in North Little Rock, Arkansas, that still exists to this very day. So I don't know if that's the long version or the short version, but it's an amazing true story that I think is also timely.
Just speaking of being timely, I mean, could be set in 2022 or be set in the civil rights era. I think it's something that is still going on, to this day, that so many people can get messages from, especially, our youth in that middle school age, because that's kind of
Right.
where you start finding your personality, you start bullying, you start getting bullied, you start, trying to fit in. And there's so many things that go into play that you don't realize how that's going to affect you later in life.
Absolutely, so true. And we shot this movie in 2020, sort of in the height of COVID. I highly recommend not shooting a movie in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, by the way. But we did. But when the script came to us that summer, George Floyd was the headlines, and exactly like you said, it's not lost on me that we arguably are in the zeitgeist of examining where we are as a nation. And in some ways, I feel like we've come so far, and in other ways, I feel like there's so much yet to be done. And so it was the irony was not lost on me that many of the things that Paul looked at and questioned and examined in his own life, 50 years ago, we as a country are still doing the same thing today. So I agree with you 100%. It's just as timely now as it was all those years ago.
Especially with Paul's journey and with his mom. I've heard you say that there's an interesting parallel between this story and your dad's story. Tell me a little bit about tapping into that.
Yeah, I was not slated to play this role. Little inside baseball trivia here, but the story came to my production company, Damascus Road Productions, and when we greenlit the picture, obviously the film hadn't been cast yet, and as I read the screenplay, and as my wife also read the screenplay, it was a fascinating parallel between Paul's story and his mother in the film, and my dad's own story and his mom. My father's mother, my grandmother, prayed for him incessantly, and really, like any good doting mother, prayed for her son. And it wasn't until late in life that my own dad came to faith on his own, and partially because his mother was just insistent that he really examine it for himself. So it wasn't lost on me that, wow, it's a Southern story. I grew up in the South. It was a similar parallel and similar track to my dad's story. So I didn't really tell anybody that, nor share that outside of my own small circle here. But the executive producer actually came to my wife, of all people, not my agent, not me, and not directly, and not anybody else, and just said, "Hey, do you think Ryan would consider taking on this role?" So I think it was meant to be all along, but we had to sort of get there by way of some interesting circumstances. So I graciously accepted, needless to say, and really dived into the role.
Talk a little bit about maybe trying to have this film reach some of our younger viewers, just to kind of see what, like, having those outside influences and maybe not being true to who you are,
Right.
might reshape, the person you and ultimately become who you may not, really want to become.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's a film that and a story, an all too familiar story, unfortunately, that sort of underscores and highlights how much we are influenced by people around us. And, young people for sure, I would argue that all of us are influenced by the company that we keep. The old adage, my mother and my grandmother's old adage of be careful about the company you keep, and it's absolutely true. And Paul was no exception. He had, without those influences early on, he just had a friend. It wasn't a black friend. It was just a friend, and it was his pal and his buddy, and they went through so much together early on. And then because of the peer pressure and the, whatever the social norms, sadly, of the times, he got away from that, and he fell in with the wrong crowd, and he was the penultimate example of somebody who did it wrong and followed the social norms at the time, until he got the courage, the gumption, some would say the faith, to stand up and buck social norms, take a look at the injustice that he saw around him, and essentially said, "Not on my watch." And man, I would love to take a page out of that book, to this very day. I think we should all do that.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that I thought about when I was watching the film was the quote from John F. Kennedy that one person can make a difference and everyone should try. That sometimes you
Yeah.
may look at somebody and say they're a lost cause or may not have faith in them, but anybody can turn themselves around. And talk a little bit about that spirit of,
Yeah.
Even though you may be headed in the wrong direction or people may not have faith in you, that you can still turn yourself around and look at the amazing work that continues with Paul.
Exactly. And again, he's a case study in exactly that. Somebody who seemingly was a lost cause. There's some levity, as through the film, and even his own wife kind of shakes her head at the thought of all people of him becoming a pastor. And so there's some fun to be had there. But he was kind of the last person on the list that one would expect to have his life turn around in that way. But he absolutely did, and I got to see the movie on opening night with the real Holderfield family. Paul Sr., whom I portray, passed away in 1998, but his family and his son is still the senior pastor of that church, and his daughter is the worship leader, and his other daughter is in vocational ministry there as well, and their whole family. And so it's a fascinating legacy that in one generation, really starting with one man, and we all have this capacity, that the trajectory of that family's life was completely changed because of his decision. And so, once again, exactly like you said, we have that within us. We have the ability to change. We have the ability to stand up, to say no to what we know and see as wrong around us, and begin a brand new legacy. In his case, he was generationally affected by the quote sins of his fathers. His dad was not a good man. His dad was an alcoholic and a racist and a domestic abuser. And Paul lived through that. Paul Sr. lived through that and was a product of that environment. But through faith and through encouragement, and by surrounding himself with the right people and good people, he was able to turn that all around for his own family.
That is amazing. And then final thing here, that I want to chat about, as far as what you learned, maybe going, you got the script, you're like, all right, we're going to go through this movie. You weren't even sure you were going to play the main character, but now it already being filmed, it already being out for a couple of weeks, audience reaction, what is maybe some of the takeaway that you maybe didn't expect or didn't realize you were going to have as far as the impact of this movie?
Oh yeah, great question. And when you're in the middle of it, just like any other film, you never know what you have on your hands. I remember an infamous interview with Robert Zemeckis and Tom Hanks when they were filming Forrest Gump, for example. And Hanks said, we would come to work every day, and I would look at Bob and say, we'll either have a great product on our hands or we'll never work again. They just there was no guarantee. And I think nearly all filmmakers and storytellers are like that. We were, again, with this one, you know how it is on a movie set. You're shooting 12, 14-hour days. And we were in the height of COVID as well. And there were so many hurdles and hoops to jump through. We just didn't know what it was going to be like, nor how it would be received, obviously. But once and I'm bragging on all the filmmakers here, not me by any stretch, but once the accolades started rolling in and we started getting nominated for film festivals, and this relatively low budget, independent, faith-based feature film started winning awards, we realized, oh my goodness, as the laurels started coming in, there is an audience that is resonating with this film. And some of the feedback that we've gotten, Rudy, is mothers, for example, praying mothers and mothers who have wayward children are resonating extremely well with this film, and they're saying, this gives me hope. And probably the overarching feedback that I've seen, both through direct messages and through just online comments, as well as critical review, is that there is hope on the other side of tragedy. And I think now more than ever, we need that sort of message. No matter what we're going through, no matter what the quote tragedy is in our own lives, if you put that into the right hands, there is hope on the other side of that. At my production company in LA, I have a mantra on my wall. I don't know who said it first. It's been credited anonymous, but I look at it every single day, and it says, the theater, meaning the movie theater, is the church for the world at large. It's where people go to sit in the dark and contemplate life. And as I look at that and think about that every day, I think, we have a job to do. And my job as a storyteller is to proliferate the message of a truth, in my opinion, a truth with a capital T. And our job is to speak truth into people's lives. And in this case, it's the ultimate gift that it was a true story. We can spend all day arguing with somebody's faith or somebody's belief, but you can't argue with somebody's true story. And in the case of Paul Holderfield, it's exactly that. What you see on the screen is exactly what we went through. And to have audiences react and resonate with a story like that, just thanking us for telling a story that ends in that way and a legacy that continues, is just the ultimate gift for a filmmaker.
Well, congratulations on all the success for the film, Ryan. Paul's Promise now in theaters.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.